Hi folks, and welcome to the 24th video in my Getting Started series for the game B-17 Flying Fortress The Mighty 8th. In this video I'll be focusing on B-17 engine management, which is a feature that was introduced to the game via a patch that updated the game to version 2.0. Unfortunately, after this patch, further development on the game stopped, and so no further updates were forthcoming. This means that engine management in the game is in effect a first release, and as such does have some issues. My initial impression of engine management was that it was somehow fundamentally broken. However, after a lot of playtesting, I now believe that the major issue I found, and others have experienced, can be worked around. It just places the onus on you as the player to be aware of this issue and to use the workaround as necessary. I'll be discussing this in detail at the end of this video. Now, before we get started, I just wanted to say that engine management adds a significant layer of complexity to playing the game, and it makes it much more difficult, for instance, to nurse a B-17 home when it has engine damage. So it will only be of interest to you if you have a desire to explore that extra complexity and are willing to spend the time learning how to manage engine temperatures both when the engines are healthy and in particular when they are damaged. With everything else that the game throws at you, with managing a crew of 10, and in a Squadron Commander game also managing 5 additional B-17s, adding engine management may be a rather daunting task, and I only recommend it once you're experienced at playing the game with engine management turned off. I also want to point out that by necessity this video must go into a lot of detail, and as such it may be difficult to digest in one sitting. Please persevere. If you want to play the game with engine management active, then I highly recommend that you work your way through all of this video, even if it is over a number of sessions. Also, to help out, I have placed links in the video description below to each section of this video so that you can quickly jump to any subject I discuss in case you want to refresh your memory on any particular area. It is important to note that the GOG.com and Steam versions of B-17 are already patched to version 2.0 and so already include engine management as an option for the player. Only patch the game if you know that yours is not version 2. How do you tell? Well, there are several ways. The easiest is to open the readme.txt file that is located in your B-17 installation folder. The game's version number should be at the top of the file. Alternatively, if you have the game on CD, you can check the CD's volume label to determine the version. Another check you can do is to start a B-17 mission, go to the cockpit instrument view and manually adjust the cowl flaps by left clicking and then right clicking on any one of the 4 cowl flap switches. If you see a tooltip pop up with the cowl flap opening displayed as a percentage, then your installed game is definitely version 2.0 and therefore includes engine management. If not, then install the patch. I'll put a link in the video description below where you can download the version 2 patch in case you need it. I haven't personally tested this patch, so if you do use it, then please let everyone know how you get on in the comments section below. First up, I'm sure you're wondering what engine management means to this game and where can you get details about this feature. Well, the only location I have found that provides any official details of engine management in the game is in the readme.htm file that is located in the game's main installation folder. This file is placed there when the game is patched to version 2.0. As we'll discover in more detail later, engine management includes the modelling of a number of different things. Firstly, modelling of engine oil temperature, carburettor air temperature and cylinder head temperature and the controls and other parameters that affect them. It also models damage to the engines when any of these temperatures exceed safe operating limits. Secondly, modelling of engine efficiency, which affects the engine's power output. This can be affected both by damage due to temperature mismanagement and also physical damage from flak or enemy fighters. And lastly, engine management adds modelling of an engine's fuel mixture setting and its effect on both engine temperature and fuel efficiency. Now, let's spend a bit of time going through the readme.htm file and analysing the information that it provides. The difficulties for engine management are controlled via the options, realism, general difficulty setting. There are 3 settings available and these are the only settings that are available to control how engine management is implemented in the game. The first setting is low and it's fairly self-explanatory and basically means that all aspects of the new engine management feature are turned off. Engine temperatures automatically move to normal values and are not influenced by any factors including any of the B-17's engine management controls. Therefore, there is no damage to the engines from temperature related effects. However, do remember that engines can still be damaged by flak and enemy fighter activity. One issue that catches a lot of people out is that using the left mouse button to adjust any of the engine controls locks the AI out from managing and controlling that engine. Now you think that when the game's general difficulty is set to low, that for example using the left mouse button to move the intercooler levers would not have that effect, seeing as these levers have no function at that difficulty level. Wrong. Doing this still locks out the AI from controlling that engine, and that includes controlling the throttle. So be careful, if you don't see the throttle or supercharger handles vibrating, then the AI is locked out completely from controlling that engine. Right click on any of that engine's lever style controls to hand control back to the AI. Not doing so can easily lead to your B-17 losing formation and crashing. The second difficulty setting is medium, which now means that full engine management modeling is active, with the AI adjusting the various engine management controls to maintain engine temperatures at their desired values. However, like the low difficulty setting, damage to the engines from temperature effects is not modeled. However, I believe that other aspects of the game are now more difficult, including increased physical damage from enemy flak and fighter attacks. The medium difficulty setting does provide you with the benefit of being able to experiment with managing engine temperatures without fear of ever doing thermal damage to them. However, the absence of thermal damage and its associated heating penalty, which I'll be coming onto in a moment, means that the medium difficulty setting is much easier than what comes next. The third difficulty setting is high and is the same as medium, except now exceeding safe operating temperatures will do damage to your engines on top of any damage due to flak and enemy fighter activity. And as we will see shortly, due to a heating penalty mechanism that engine management introduces, this can actually lead to that damage escalating upon itself, which can lead to engines fouling much more quickly than before unless rapid action is taken to bring engine temperatures back under control. On the subject of the heating penalty mechanism, the notes section is the only place where this is mentioned. As the notes state, when an engine is damaged, it suffers from a heating penalty. Therefore, damaged engines will tend to overheat more at the same power levels. So this basically means that when an engine sustains any form of damage, be it from temperatures exceeding safe limits or from enemy action, that its operating temperatures will be higher than normal. This means that trying to keep a damaged engine operating within normal temperature limits becomes much more difficult using the engine temperature management controls. Fail to do so and further damage takes place with even more heating penalties, which makes it even more difficult to bring temperatures back under control. As you can hopefully see, this can easily lead to a damaged engine's temperatures quickly escalating out of control and the loss of that engine, unless you take rapid and effective action to prevent it. So, for example, under circumstances where you are unable to keep a damaged engine's temperatures within safe operating limits, it is imperative that you either reduce the throttle on that engine or take other emergency actions such as diving at high speed to cool the engine. But I'll discuss strategies such as this in more detail later on. Now, the notes then move on to discuss a number of items of note. First up are the carburetor air filters, which are turned on and off by left-clicking this switch. When the filters are off, the green lights are lit. When the filters are on, the orange lights are lit. The purpose of these filters is to ensure that clean filtered air enters the engines. At low altitude, the air may contain small particles that could damage an engine, and this is why these filters should always be turned on when the aircraft is operating below 8,000 feet. However, as the notes state, not only does each engine lose power due to the air pressure drop across the filters, and this is in the form of a loss of 1.5 inches of manifold pressure, but much more significantly, there is also a heating penalty on the carburetor air temperature. Now this means that the intercooler lever settings need to be further towards the cold setting when the filters are on compared to when they are off. And we can see the effect of this here, where I have manually set the intercooler levers to a fixed setting by left clicking on them, and then turn on and off the carburetor air filters. By doing this, we can see that the carburetor air temperature heating penalty is around 10 to 15 degrees centigrade. Note that turning the carburetor air filters on and off manually is not something you really need to worry about, as the AI always correctly turns these on and off as needed whenever the altitude rises above or drops below 8,000 feet. However, there is one exception to this, which I'll cover later in the video. Now let's move on to the fuel booster pumps, which only affect fuel efficiency. As the notes state, fuel boosters should be on for engine start, takeoff, landing, flight below 1,000 feet and flight above 10,000 feet. If fuel pressure is above 10, then there is a fuel usage penalty. So basically, the fuel booster pump should always be off when your altitude is somewhere between 1,000 and 10,000 feet. What's of greater interest here is the fuel usage penalty when the fuel pressure is above 10. So with this knowledge, can it be used to reduce fuel consumption and avoid wasting precious fuel? Well, the answer is yes. When cruising at a typical 30,000 feet, you'll notice that the fuel pressure is well below 10, even with the fuel booster pumps on. However, as you decrease altitude from 30,000 to 10,000 feet, at which point the fuel booster pumps are turned off, the fuel pressure gradually increases. It's around 20,000 feet when the fuel pressure reaches a value of 10. So if fuel consumption is of concern, then one answer is to try and avoid cruising between 10,000 and 20,000 feet, as this is the region when the fuel booster pumps are on, the fuel pressure is above 10, and the fuel usage penalty applies. Now the final item in the notes section is more of a for information point, in that when cowl flaps are open, they now have a small effect on drag. This is a minor consideration compared to the far more important task of managing engine temperature using the cowl flaps, and as such I would suggest that this additional drag effect can be safely ignored. To monitor engine temperatures, the best view is that seen when in the F6 cockpit instrument view. Now this is available by selecting either the pilot or co-pilot, whose keyboard shortcuts are the numbers 3 and 4 keys at the top of your keyboard respectively, then pressing the I key to go to the cockpit instrument view, followed by the F6 function key to zoom into the engine management instruments. Now there are 3 different key engine temperature instruments to monitor, and these are the oil temperature, which is shown for each engine on these 2 gauges, cylinder head temperature, which is shown for each engine on these 2 gauges, and carburettor air temperature, which again is shown for each engine but on these 2 gauges. Now to assist in monitoring if any of the engine temperatures is exceeding its safe operating limit, the version 2 patch introduced colour-coded pop-up tooltips. Now these are activated by hovering your mouse over any one of the temperature gauge needles. Now this pops up a tooltip that not only gives you the numerical value for the current temperature reading, but also a colour code to indicate the status of that temperature. As the version 2 notes state, there are 4 different colour codes. First up we have blue. And this indicates that the temperature is below desirable levels, and although not stated, this may or may not be dangerous, which I'll discuss later. Regardless, action should be taken to increase the temperature. Next up we have green. This means that the temperature is within desirable levels and that no action is needed. Next up we have amber, which means that the temperature is exceeding desirable levels, but not by a dangerous amount as yet. And finally, red, which indicates that the temperature is exceeding desirable levels and by a dangerous amount. Action should be taken to decrease the temperature immediately. Now, one major issue with these tooltips is that often I find they just refuse to be displayed, and only after repeatedly moving the mouse and readjusting its position over a needle does the tooltip eventually appear. Other times, I find the tooltip pops up with no issue. To overcome this, and to make it far easier to quickly determine if a temperature reading is safe or not, I have added coloured lines to the temperature gauges. So to be in the green safe zone, you just have to keep the needle between the upper and lower amber lines on each gauge. Go outside of that and you're into amber territory. Go above the red line and you're into the red danger zone, or go below the blue line and you're in the blue potentially dangerous zone. Now I'll provide a link in the video description for you to download this instrument panel mod, and later in this video I'll show you how to install it in the game. The last item in this section provides some insight into the changes made around the modelling of the cowl flaps, which I recommend that you read. The most important aspect, and one that I have mentioned before in prior videos, is that both left and right clicking on one of the cowl flap switches to open or close them will lock the AI out from controlling and managing that engine. As such, it is necessary to right click on any one of the engine's lever style controls, such as the throttles or fuel mixture controls, if you want to hand control and management of that engine back to the AI. And remember that this also includes the AI controlling the throttle. Another feature added in the version 2 patch is the modelling of fuel mixture and its effect on engine temperatures and fuel efficiency. Now let's take a look at the table that is presented in the notes. First up we have auto lean, which is used when cruising at low altitudes or payloads. So for example, this setting would be used during most of the second half of a mission after dropping your bombs. Now this setting has the advantage of providing the best fuel economy, but has the downside of leading to the hottest engines. Now when this table refers to engine temperature, it is really referring to cylinder head temperature. So if you are struggling with cylinder head temperatures due to engine damage, then it may well be necessary to avoid using this fuel mixture setting. Next up we have Auto Rich, which is used for takeoff, landing and climbing, and cruising at high altitudes with heavy payloads. So for example, this setting would be used for most of the beginning of a mission before dropping your bombs. The downside of this setting is that fuel economy is worse, but with the benefit of a slight cooling effect on cylinder head temperature. And finally, we have Emergency Rich, which is used in emergency situations where engine temperature is critical. Now this setting provides for rapid cooling of the cylinder head temperature, but at the expense of fuel economy. Bear in mind the notes below the table where it states that Emergency Rich reduces maximum power output under normal circumstances, but may increase allowable output by cooling very hot engines. That said, in an emergency where one or more engines are dangerously overheating out of control, then I would not hesitate to switch the fuel mixture to Emergency Rich, regardless of the effect on power output of the engine or engines. I would do this at least until the engine temperatures are back under control, and then experiment to see if the fuel mixture can be safely reduced to Auto Rich. Let's skip over the strategy section for now and have a look at the 3 temperature data sections. There is one section for each of the 3 critical engine temperatures that must be controlled. As mentioned before, these are oil temperature, carburetor air temperature, and cylinder head temperature. Now each one of these sections provides information on the operational temperature ranges, heating influences, cooling influences, the rate of change, and damage. So let's look through each one of these temperature data sections one at a time. First up, we have the oil temperature data section. Under operational temperature ranges, we can see that the minimum temperature is plus 60 degrees C, the maximum is plus 88, and the desired is plus 70. Now my analysis of the tooltips has shown that the following temperature ranges are modelled. Below 60 is blue, between 60 and 65 is amber, between 65 and 84 is green, between 84 and 88 is amber, and above 88 is red. These ranges are represented on my instrument panel mod as I'm showing now. The only heating influence on oil temperature is power, which can be monitored via the manifold pressure gauge. So the greater the manifold pressure, the greater the heating influence, and vice versa. It's important to note that all other things being equal, in particular the throttle settings, if the manifold pressure for an engine is lower than others, then this is about the best indication to you that an engine has sustained damage. The larger the loss of manifold pressure, the greater the damage. Now there are no direct ways with which to cool oil temperature other than by reducing power by reducing the throttle setting. Now there are 2 indirect influences on oil temperature, and these are airspeed and altitude. The greater the airspeed and the higher the altitude, the more the cooling influence becomes. The rate of change of oil temperature is classified as very slow. This means that it can take minutes to see a reasonable response in the oil temperature reading following actions that you may have taken. As such, you need to be aware that allowing the oil temperature to rise into the red zone can be more dangerous than other temperatures simply due to the fact that bringing it back down again will not be quick, and that the longer it is in the red zone, the more damage that is done. Now damage can occur under 2 different conditions. The first is when the power is high and the oil temperature is low. Now this is why it is critical to let the oil temperature rise to at least 60 degrees C before taking off. Secondly, damage will occur when the oil temperature is high, and that means when it is above 88 degrees C and in the red zone. Next up, we have the carburetor air temperature data section. Now under operational temperature ranges, we can see that the minimum temperature is plus 15 degrees C, the maximum is plus 38, and the desired is plus 20. Now my analysis of the tooltips has shown that the following temperature ranges are modelled. Below plus 15 is blue, between 15 and 20 is amber, between 20 and 34 is green, between 34 and 38 is amber, and above 38 is red. And again, these ranges are represented on my instrument panel mod as I'm showing here. Like oil temperature, the only heating influence on carburetor air temperatures is power, which again can be monitored via the manifold pressure gauge. So the greater the manifold pressure, the greater the heating influence, and vice versa. Unlike oil temperature, there is a way to directly control the carburetor air temperature, and this is achieved by using the intercoolers, which can be accessed by pressing the F9 function key on your keyboard when in any of the cockpit instrument views. As with oil temperature, there are two indirect influences on carburetor air temperature, and these are the same, that is airspeed and altitude. The greater the airspeed and the higher the altitude, the more the cooling influence becomes. Now, the rate of change of carburetor air temperature is classified as fast. This means that it responds in seconds, and as such could be seen to be the easiest to control. However, with its fast response there is a caveat in that this also means that it can move into a dangerous temperature range just as quickly. Needless to say, all temperatures need to be closely monitored when engine management is active. Damage can occur under two different conditions. The first is when the temperature is low, the engine's efficiency will be gradually reduced until eventual failure. If the temperature is increased before failure, the efficiency will gradually recover. Secondly, damage will occur when the carburetor air temperature is high. That means when it is above 38 degrees C and in the red zone, which is right at the top end of the gauge. And finally, we have the cylinder head temperature data section. Now, under operational temperature ranges, we can see that the minimum temperature is plus 150 degrees C. The maximum is plus 205 and the desired is plus 204. Just 1 degree C below the maximum? What? Well, fortunately, this is a typo and the maximum is in fact 218 degrees C, which I'll show in a moment. Anyway, so my analysis of the tooltips has shown that the following temperature ranges are modelled. Now, below plus 100 degrees C is blue, between 100 and 150 is amber, between 150 and 205 is green, between 205 and 218 is amber, and above, yes, 218 degrees C is red. And this is confirmation of the typo in the engine management notes. These ranges are represented on my instrument panel mod as I'm showing here right now. Like both oil and carburetor air temperatures, the only heating influence on cylinder head temperature is power, which again can be monitored via the manifold pressure gauge. So, as before, the greater the manifold pressure, the greater the heating influence, and vice versa. There are 5 cooling influences on cylinder head temperature. First, let's take a look at the last 3, all of which are direct ways to control cylinder head temperature. The first 2 are via the intercoolers and the cowl flaps. However, as already mentioned, the intercoolers are the only direct way of controlling the carburetor air temperature. So it is best to first adjust the intercoolers to minimize the carburetor air temperature within safe limits. Then, with the intercoolers set, use the cowl flaps to bring the cylinder head temperature to the desired safe setting of around 204 degrees C. Now, the third direct way of controlling the cylinder head temperature is via the fuel mixture control, which I have already discussed. Although in practice the fuel mixture should be set based on other factors first and should be only used to manage engine temperatures if things are going wrong and cylinder head temperatures are otherwise out of control. As with both oil and carburetor air temperatures, there are 2 indirect influences on cylinder head temperature, and again these are the same, that is airspeed and altitude. This time, however, the magnitude of their effect depends on the setting of the intercooler and the cowl flaps. But in general, there is a much lower effect through open intercoolers than through open cowl flaps. The rate of change of cylinder head temperature is classified as slow. It really isn't that slow, it's just much slower than the carburetor air temperature response, and it is much faster than the way oil temperature responds. The response can still be measured in seconds, and it is well under 1 minute. Damage occurs only when the cylinder head temperature is high. As such, I do not show the blue lines on these gauges on the instrument panel mod. Now, the version 2 notes include 2 sections covering strategies. The first section is specific to engine management, while the second section is really more general gameplay type strategies. Let's look through these in order. So the first section, which is just called strategy, starts off with a couple of paragraphs on oil temperature as follows. Your oil temperature needs to be closely watched, as cowl flaps and intercoolers can do nothing to affect it. Only reducing power and increasing airspeed and/or altitude can lower your oil temperature. Times to watch, particularly for high oil temperatures, are at low altitude climbs, especially after takeoff or when carrying a heavy payload. Always remember that a high oil temperature may force you out of formation or risk engine damage and should be avoided. It goes on to say that if your oil temperature does start to rise during a climb, especially if it rises evenly across all engines, you should try leveling off slightly and reducing power to maintain a constant airspeed of 150 miles per hour. Now, having a high airspeed will tend to increase the cooling effects on the engine, so reducing the power on a climb without in turn reducing the climb rate will result in a bleed off of airspeed. Next up is carburetor air temperature, where it states that the carburetor air temperature reacts quickly to cooling or heating and tends to decrease in relation to the temperature of the air surrounding the aircraft, which cools quickly with altitude. You should therefore gradually move the intercoolers to the hot or closed position during a climb to stop ice forming in the carburetor. The sign to check for if icing in the carburetor is suspected is a drop-off in power output from the affected engine. If the temperature in the carburetor is not raised to counter this, then the power reduction will accelerate. Eventually the engine will fail entirely, and once the carburetor is completely frozen in this manner, the damage will not be correctable in flight. Then it moves on to a strategy for cylinder head temperature, where it says to remember that the intercoolers also affect cylinder head temperature, albeit to a much lesser extent than their effects on the carburetor air temperature. And then it goes on to say that the cylinder head temperature will vary slowly and is best controlled with the cowl flaps, although the intercoolers also affect it slightly. Running the engine in auto rich will have a slight cooling effect, but emergency rich will have a dramatic cooling effect at the cost of excessive fuel consumption and loss of power. Now, these last few items are hardly strategies, but are rather a repeat of information given elsewhere in the document. The final item, though, is very useful, stating that in emergencies, diving at speeds of around 200 to 250 miles per hour is a useful tactic for reducing the engine temperatures quickly. Now, diving to cool an engine or engines and then adjusting controls to keep temperatures at desired levels may mean the difference between saving an engine and losing it. This section starts off by stating that the biggest change in gameplay from this patch regards altitude and the way the successful commander uses it during a mission. It goes on to say that the following things will have to be remembered. Now, the first item simply clarifies that any physical damage to engines from enemy action will reduce power output from that engine and may also have an impact on engine temperatures. The effect of this is twofold. Firstly, the loss of power may mean that you are no longer able to maintain formation at say 30,000 feet and an airspeed of 150 miles per hour. Secondly, managing a damaged engine's temperatures may be more difficult to deal with, which is related to the heating penalty that I discussed earlier. Now, the second item is pretty logical in that your bomb payload now adds additional load to your engines, which means that greater power and higher fuel consumption is needed to maintain the same altitude and airspeed. Once you have released your bombs, engine power and fuel consumption are both reduced. The third item is related to the last one. If you are forced to abort a mission because you can't stay with your formation, then you should immediately jettison your bombs to reduce the load on your engines, which may be damaged, and to reduce fuel consumption. Next up is a particularly interesting item which states that you can manually force more power out of your engines, although it doesn't tell you how. It says that the AI will act protectively towards your engines, and you can often squeeze a lot more power out of them than it can. Again, I wish it would say how. Only push an engine to destruction if you have to. However, watch for the black smoke that warns of overheating to the point of damage. Now, this is something I haven't really tried, and so leave it to you to explore what temperature adjustments allow you to squeeze more power out of those engines. And I'm assuming it is referring to power that can be gleaned by adjusting temperatures to some degree. It may also involve adjustments of propeller pitch, but again, it gives you no clue as to how you do that squeezing. So if you do try this, then please let us all know how you get on in the comments section below. Now, I'll skip the next item as it isn't engine management related, so read that at your own leisure. And item 6 is something I've already covered, so I'll also skip this. Item 7 states that the AI will attempt to maintain temperatures and power outputs within acceptable norms. If you do lock the AI out from engine control, then once you return control back to the AI by right-clicking any engine control lever, it will only alter your original settings in order to stay within those norms. So it is possible to force the AI to accept a slightly different control position as long as the engine temperatures are still within the amber operating limits. The final item is very important for mission success. It states that evasive action during flak attacks is a necessity if playing with complex engine management. Every flak fragment that impacts an engine reduces that engine's efficiency. Now, a great way to avoid damage from flak is to go to the radio operator as soon as flak is sighted or a time skip is interrupted with an attack warning and order a 2,000 foot change in altitude. By the time the flak is bursting around your formation, you should be far enough into your altitude change to avoid the worst of it. Personally, I have found that a 3000 foot altitude change command can be even better. Also, personally, apart from ensuring adequate engine warm-up prior to takeoff, and see my prior video in this series for information on that, I leave the AI to manage the engines until enemy activity starts to take place. Now the AI does a reasonably good job of keeping the engine temperatures within safe limits during the safe outward leg of a mission. However, once enemy flak and fighters are encountered, and you get a spare moment or two, I recommend that you check the engines for damage, and remember this is easy to identify by either a reduced manifold pressure and or smoke coming from an engine, and then make adjustments to that engine's temperature controls, fuel mixture control and or throttle as necessary. Because if the damage is significant enough, then the AI does tend to lose control of those temperatures. So if you'd like to use the instrument panel mod that I created, then you'll first need to install what is called the OMF mod utility. And I'll place a download link for the utility in the video description below. So first of all, unzip the contents of the downloaded file to a convenient location. Then copy the OMF mod executable program file to your B-17 game's main installation folder. Now, despite what the readme.txt file may say, do not copy the coreparts.dll file to the game's installation folder. Version 2 of B-17 installs a newer version of the coreparts.dll file than that provided in the OMF mod zip file. Next, we'll make a backup of the game file that we're modding so that you can change back to the original should you wish to uninstall the mod. So navigate to the game's installation folder and then drill down to the resources and then the media folder. Copy the B-17 data.omf file to a safe location such as your documents folder. Now we need to associate OMF files with the OMF mod utility. To do this, right-click on the B-17 data.omf file and select Open With and the Choose Another App or Choose Program depending on which version of Windows you're using. First, make sure that the Always Use this app or program to open OMF files checkbox is ticked. Now, if you don't see the OMF mod utility listed, then click on More Apps and then scroll to the bottom of the list and click on Look for another app on this PC. Navigate to your B-17 installation folder and click on the omfmod.exe file and select the Open button. Now this will open the B-17 data OMF file in the OMF mod utility. In the future, you can simply double-click on the OMF file that you want to edit to have it automatically open in the OMF mod utility. Now unzip the Engine Management Instruments mod zip file to a convenient location. Click on the Instrument Panel 3.tga file and drag it over the Open OMF mod window and let go of the mouse button. Scroll down the OMF mod listing on the left and you should see that the item named Instrument Panel 3 has turned red. This means that you have loaded a new version of the graphic into the Open Data file. Now left click on the name and you will see a preview of it in the window on the right of the utility. Now click the Save Changes button on the bottom right to save the updated B-17 data OMF file. Next, start the B-17 startup program and select the Options tab. Then delete the graphics cache, followed by creating the graphics cache again. This ensures that the graphics cache now includes the mod that we installed into the B-17 data OMF file. Now you can start the game and enjoy the delights of coloured engine management lines on your temperature gauges. For a long time now, I honestly thought that engine management in the game was somehow broken. Whenever I was close to the end of a mission with the game's general difficulty settings set to high, I would find that either two engines would just suddenly die for no apparent reason, or that the crew spontaneously bowed out. And this wasn't something that was exclusive to just the B-17 I was controlling, but would happen to the entire squadron. It wasn't until I started really doing in-depth research for this video that I figured out a common denominator. That is, the problems always occurred after a B-17 received the Orbit and Wait for Landing Clearance command and had descended to the orbiting altitude of 2,500 feet. Now once there, every B-17's engine would always start belching out black smoke, as you can see here. This is in fact a warning sign, as black smoke can be a sign of a damaged or overheating engine. Now once I checked the engine instruments, I confirmed that the engines were indeed overheating, but it was only the carburettor air temperature that was the problem. So this got me thinking, why does the black smoke occur when orbiting at 2,500 feet while waiting to land, and not while orbiting at the start of a mission as the B-17s form up into formation? Well, the reason comes down to the intercooler controls and how the game manages them. At the start of a mission, while orbiting, the AI controls the intercoolers to achieve the desired temperature setting, move an intercooler significantly away from its current position using the right mouse button, and you can see the AI move it back to move the carburetor air temperature back to the desired setting. However, and this is a big however, at the end of a mission, after the B-17 receives that orbit and wait for landing clearance command, the AI's engine management control is disabled. This means that there is now no AI control of the fuel booster pumps, the carburettor air filters, the cowl flaps or the intercoolers. Now just prior to this, and for some bizarre reason, the intercoolers are all automatically set to the hottest setting. As such, when the B-17 starts to descend and the AI engine management is disabled, the intercoolers all stay fixed at that hottest setting. Now, this doesn't cause a problem during the descent, as the throttles and engine power are reduced well below normal. But once the P-17 reaches 2,500 feet, the throttles and engine power are again increased to maintain speed and level out the flight. However, this sudden increase in engine power, combined with the intercoolers being fixed to hot, leads to the carburetor air temperature for each engine rapidly rising above the maximum of 38 degrees C. Continue without correcting this and significant engine damage occurs. The heating penalty from the damage then starts to cause the cylinder head temperatures to rise, which should be countered by the AI automatically opening the cowl flaps. But seeing as the AI engine management is disabled at this point, this doesn't happen either, and the cylinder head temperatures start to rise out of control above their safe level. Now, within 5 minutes of leveling off, you'll find that for each B-17, either two engines suddenly fail or the crew automatically bows out as the pilots detect imminent failure of the engines. Watch as B-17s around you all crash and burn, including your own. Fortunately, the fix is simple in that when each B-17 receives its orbit and wait for landing clearance order, work through the procedure I'm about to present to you for each B-17 that is available for you to control. So that's all 6 in a Squadron Commander game, but only 1 in all others. You may want to slow down the game while you do this by pressing the End key on your keyboard. First up, turn off the fuel booster pumps for each engine. Remember that these should always be off between 1,000 and 10,000 feet. The altitude is now below 10,000 feet, so here I'm switching off the fuel booster pumps. The fuel pressure now drops below 10 psi. Here I am right clicking on the fuel mixture controls to hand throttle control back to the AI. At 8,000 feet, turn on the carburettor air filters. And you do this by left clicking on this switch. Note that the lights for the carburettor air filters have now all turned orange to indicate that they are on. Around 3,000 feet, that is before it starts to level off at 2,500 feet, quickly reduce all intercoolers to just below halfway towards the cold setting using your right mouse button. Do not use the left mouse button to do this, as it will lock out the engine throttles from AI control. Now, what you'll notice is when the B-17s start to level off, they no longer belch black smoke out of the back of them, and that is because the carburetor air temperature is within the safe operating zone. Now, if that isn't the case, then obviously do any minor adjustments to those intercooler settings as necessary. Now, don't forget, you still may have damaged engines from your mission, so while orbiting, continue to monitor all engine temperatures and manage them using the cowl flaps and intercoolers accordingly. Remember again though, to open the cowl flaps, press the left mouse button and the right mouse button to close them. And if you do, adjust the cowl flaps in any way, even with the right mouse button, then this still locks out the AI from controlling that engine's throttle. So right click on any control lever associated with that engine to hand throttle control back to the AI as soon as you have finished with your cowl flap adjustments. Next, once your B-17 receives its clearance for landing, which is indicated by the B-17 suddenly turning away from its orbit and towards the runway, you can safely ignore the engine management controls and focus on landing. At this stage, the engine management AI jumps back into action and automatically sets the engine controls up for landing. And it first of all ensures that the carburettor air filters are on, then it opens the cowl flaps to 100%, and finally it sets the intercoolers to fully cold. Now, if this is all too tedious for you, simply time skip and accelerate time by pressing the Enter key and Home keys a sufficient number of times. Just ignore the messages that say time skipping has been disabled due to the plane's landing. Just continue to try and accelerate time to at least 8 times normal and keep pressing the enter key, and it will eventually time skip to the debriefing room. Now this seems to bypass the engine overheating issues and all B-17s land safely. That is assuming that there were no other issues with them. Phew! Well, that's it folks, and congratulations if you made it this far. I really hope you find this video useful, and if you did, please take the time to click on that thumbs up below. Thank you very much for watching folks. Take care. Bye bye.